Her career as a social worker took a new turn when she entered a continuing care retirement community.
And I really went to that community to retire, I swear. There are a group of people from my CCRC sitting here tonight, and they are my support system because they were the people who said, "You're right, we'll help." And they stuck their necks out. It's not easy to do when you're dependent upon people for your care. It's frightening. And most of the people of our age are inarticulate, frightened, and very vulnerable. I have to stop.
Yeah.
You'll have to edit this. I'm sorry, dear.
And you look good, and you did everything just perfect, and you're
I'm going to keep it.
wonderful.
I'm going to keep it.
I talk to you another time. Bye-bye. Have a nice day with them today. Bye-bye, Lily.
Darling, that woman signed a contract. May I digress, please? This is very important. Marion and I have become, we're joined at the hip. She walked in, at one time, CCRCs did have an age limit. When I came, it was 84. Marion is married to a man of 92, was married to a man of 92, and she signed a contract without realizing there was an exclusion clause in there. This man of 92 who paid full freight because he was admitted here, and it is not cheap for a couple, it's $500,000. And she had, I asked to see her contract because she was bewildered because he was being refused health care, which is the primary reason you buy these contracts. You buy in to get health care. They had excluded him from any health care. He could not use the area for physical rehabilitation that we have, and I'll get into outsourcing later, and he could not use our health center, but he had paid, as I did and everyone else here did, and pays a full fee for the monthly care fee, but they put that exclusion in, and if the 5 years passes, he will be either dead or very old, and if he outlives that 5 years, they will give him care, which I think is a very interesting way to run a railroad. And this was, I read this and I said to Marion, "Did you show this to a lawyer?" And she said, "No, I didn't." And I said, "Did you see this?" She said, "What is it?" Now these are very intelligent people. Nobody who moves in here is poor, but they are uninformed. And Marion actually had signed that contract, and Gordon, who is a very sharp, he's got all his marbles. Yes, he's sitting in a wheelchair. Yes, he has physical problems, but there ain't nothing wrong with what goes on in the brain. And I finally pointed this out to her. She never forgot it. And she and I have been very good friends. When people had to sneak into my apartment because of the fact that I was trying to start an organization called CalCRA, which is the California Continuing Care Residents Association, an independent residents organization controlled by residents, run by residents, for residents all over the state of California, and we are 20,000 strong. So that is the story of my relationship to Marion. Anytime I'm doing social work here, I'm supposed to be retired, but when people get into trouble, they find their way to my apartment because we do not have an on-staff social worker. You read my article on the misuse of social workers by CCRCs. I think they have done a dreadful thing to our profession. My passion is for justice.
Right.
Let's be fair, Esther.
Right.
I'm not asking for anything but justice. I say if you are selling a product that says to people, we will take care of you for the whole of your life, whatever is left of it, we will give you dignity, we will give you a fair shake, we will try to keep you as independent as possible. This is, all this stuff is written into the law. It's a lovely concept, but the implementation falls very far short. I want everyone to understand that this is not a unique experience. As I tell you about my experience, I also want to tell you about my experience as a social worker here, retired. But I began to realize I had to fill a gap, a big hole, and I wanted the administration to hire a social worker, because you cannot have people facing the loss of mates, catastrophic illness, the loss of faculties, the ability to swallow, the ability to see, the ability to walk, and not have someone that they can talk to. The other residents are simply not interested. As they have said to me many, many times, I've got my own troubles. I can't get excited. I have a heart condition. And I respect that. I came here for peace and quiet. I don't want to raise hell. Well, neither did I. I came here for peace and quiet, too. I came here to retire and write my books, do my research, have a little fun, do some history. It's a continuing care residential community which offers lifelong care. Now, that's a marvelous concept. If you don't want to be a burden to your family, that's a good concept. And this is why I came here. I didn't come here to die, I came here to live. But when I reached the point where I could no longer take care of myself, I didn't want to shift that burden to my children, because they have their own families. The contract is written to favor the provider and not favor the resident. And of course, I have learned a lot about the contract. For example, the idea of a continuum of care sounds attractive, but when people come to a point where they really need care, they are really better off in their own familiar surroundings. Take them out of there. Have them coping with people who barely can speak their language and they can't really communicate, who will hand you your dentures unrinsed for you to put in your mouth. And then if you gag on it, and there's an incident like that in the book, they say you should be grateful for any care we give you. Okay? In not quite correct English. Okay? And if you get upset and throw a clock on the floor, which can happen if you're pretty angry and you're old, you're tired, and you've just come back from an operation, and then you try to go down to complain to management, and you are stopped on the way by the director of nurses who's supposed to be chastising the person who did this to you, and then you are accused, when you try to get past her into the elevator, of having been abusive or hurt her with your walker, which you can barely stand on because you're only a couple of days out of an operation. This is a real case I'm describing to you, okay? And then this is the kind of thing you can encounter outside of your own milieu, your own home. The most important thing that has to be done is that people have to understand the product they are buying. Your care is as good as the administrator in charge. Anyone can be an administrator, an executive director in one of these places. There are people who have had police work background, ministerial, clergy, people who are accountants, people who are all they have to do is get themselves a course, a gerontology certificate. a vice president for operations here, who is no longer with us, got a certificate. He was a literature major. He wrote like an angel, but he did on-the-job training. Well, while he was doing his training, he turned out to be a pretty good administrator. But when I needed to see him about my own problem, I had to force my way into his office. And he said to me, this is the vice president for operations, he said to me, I have very little to do with the residents. And you have to go through channels. Well, I'd already been through the channels. I talked to the executive director. I'd even gone up to the CEO. And the answer was, Mrs. Hyatt, you're not happy. Maybe you should be leaving. Well, that's a very interesting choice. I had already put in $250,000. This was my home. I should leave because I'm not happy, because the service that was promised under the law and in my contract and my doctors had prescribed was not going to be given to me. And my choice was to leave my apartment and go to the health center and leave them with a $300,000 apartment to sell, which is quite lovely. You've had the tour. And say quietly, oh yes, I need pureed food now. It is not rocket science. An old lady might need pureed food somewhere along the line. And their director of the dining services said, oh, you get a housekeeper to help you, or you get someone to puree your food, and that's fine. And I said, but I'm already paying for that service, and I don't want it. So the administration let me swing in the wind. I brought in an ombudsman, and then after the ombudsman, and he had written a letter saying, this woman does not require a higher level of care because she doesn't need any help with the activities of daily living. She needs pureed food in her apartment. And they ignored the letter for a very simple reason. The ombudsman has no enforcement powers. The ombudsman and I became very good friends. He was my first teacher, helped me with my first research on my book, and he is still the ombudsman. And once we had lunch together, and the staff came by and they said, is anything wrong? And he said, no, Lily and I are collaborating on a book. But this is where the system failed. Now, the nurse did what she was supposed to do. She reported it. She asked the administration to go forward. Their answer was to let me swing in the wind. And I haven't showed you my kitchen as yet, but that was complete. I had to spend another $1,500 so that I could puree my food for 1 year. Sometimes I was too tired to eat. And they fought me, and I had to get a lawyer, and after $3,000 and a year of agony, they settled the suit just before we were going to an open situation with an arbitration, which would have made this public information. This is really the bottom line. They folded. I now get my pureed food in my apartment. This does not mean to say that some people do not get good care. The truth is that some people survive the system, and some people have even benefited from it. But usually they are people who are very vocal in support of the administration. My administration, right or wrong. And I got the name of grouser for complaining. The councils, which is supposed to represent the residents, unfortunately, are packed usually, unwittingly or wittingly, with administration supporters. So the person who has a legitimate complaint is made to feel, don't say that. I always laughed and said it was like the mafia, omerta, silence. You keep your mouth shut. If you're having a problem, nobody's interested, not the other residents certainly, because most people as they age do become much more inward, much less, as they would say, I have my own problems, I don't need to hear yours, which is true. But I'm the exception that proves the rule, of course, because I am ready to listen to anyone's problem, and then I try to find a solution.
Last night and in our previous discussions, I have two questions for you. One, you have some very strong opinions about social workers in CCRC facilities.
Correct.
And the other is in the aging process, that the services and the attention that we pay today is primarily to those with serious problems, dysfunctional issues, alcoholism, addictions, severe health problems.
Or abused children, which is legitimate. However, because you have saved for retirement. You know, I've been through every hardship, my generation. It's not just me. We lived through a depression. We lived through several wars. You know, I don't want to recount. Starting with World War II, when I was all of 14, that was the beginning. And we are in one in Iraq now, and a Korean War, and a Vietnam War, and all of the attendant things with that. I feel I've paid my dues. I've raised 2 families and numerous other people's children, and I have educated myself. I have given service to the community. I'm entitled to dignity and peace at the end of my life and respect. And I was called a liar for speaking out, and when Jan Lee said it well, the executive director of the California chapter for National Association of Social Work, he said they were going to shut me up. I have a recent letter from their attorney asking me to cease and desist my writing columns, a book, and all that, because it was not comfortable. I was telling truth to power. I guess that's what you call it today. Tyranny is tyranny. And even if you do it to a woman who has saved enough to make a decent retirement, or you do it to a man who has been an executive and you start treating him like a very small child, you know, this is the sort of thing that has to stop. And what we need to stop it is not the young social workers who cannot really begin to comprehend what an aging person lives through. And if you even manage to keep your sense of humor and your sense of balance, and you understand this is part of the downside or the flip side of becoming old, and if you wanted to avoid this, you went when you were young and beautiful, and not when you were old and crumbling. But anyway, to say, I still believe that if you, in good faith, pay a great deal of money, you have a right to the same privilege you have when you buy a bad product at Macy's. You can return it and get some kind of recompense. Here, there is no place to return the product. Therefore, we need people on guard constantly. I want older social workers to retrain, not the training they received to work through other systems and with other populations, but to really retrain, and not in the schools of gerontology. It's a whole different cup of tea. Social work probably should take in the gerontology people, and there should be some kind of blending. I happen to be working with a medical anthropologist now who is doing her doctoral dissertation on continuing care residential communities. And I have tried to explain, and even these people who are aware, a medical anthropologist is aware of cultures. And we were talking about something one day, and she said, well, I'll make the call. I said, no, you won't. I said, I will make the call. I want the people at the bank to know that they're dealing with me and not an intermediary or a spokesman or an advocate for me. I'm not at that stage yet. And this is what the social workers have to learn. Don't case manage. find out what the strengths are of this person and what that person can do. And whatever that person can do, however haltingly, however slowly, you wait, you're patient, and let them do it. And this is the basic change in the training. And I am looking for social workers who have left bureaucratic positions where they're loaded with paperwork, where they have an enormous amount of work to do just to get through the day with a caseload that is unmanageable. You would have 360 folks to deal with in a place of this size, and most places that are smaller are not viable. And you are also dealing with an extremely accomplished group of people who have owned businesses, started banks, who have been in the world and were successful. They're an interesting group. If you manage to find out what they are as people and know what their capabilities were and are. We have had many doctors here who have been in my facility, and I know there must be in others, and lawyers, and people who really were movers and shakers in their day in the community, and they do decline. This is inevitable. But make sure that they are respected and that they don't have to run out into the hall stark naked looking for help in the health center.
I know that among your recent activities, you've been actively involved with ARP, the American Association of Retired Persons.
That happened by a fluke. I was actually doing some testimony for the Human Services Committee in the Senate, I believe it was, and then I went back to the Assembly, and in the room was part of the volunteer system of ARP, and she heard me testify. You know, you're allowed 2 minutes. And she gave me her card, and she said, I want to talk to you some more. And we began a telephone conversation. I began to send her my columns, and she began to speak to the advocacy manager of ARP, who happens to be Casey Young. He's still in that position. He was there last night. Did you meet him?
No, I did not.
He was there with his wife and came from Sacramento, which was a nice tribute. But Casey created a position for me. He wanted a panel of experts, but apparently, who were older people who knew their field, but apparently I filled the bill, and I was the first. And I now have a title of policy specialist, and for a couple of years I was policy advisor on continuing care residential communities. And of course, they have given attorneys to people who have been fighting cases in places like this under the Americans for Disabilities Act and Fair Housing, when they didn't want to leave their apartments to go into skilled nursing or assisted living. They wanted to stay in their homes, and I'm a great advocate of that. And if you really start to pay for that, it can amount to, plus your initial fee, your entrance fee, plus your monthly care fee, it can amount to $13,000 a month for around-the-clock care. You add that one up.
How are we doing for time?
We have 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
But you know, dear, can you stop the camera? I've got to get...
Way? Or the books that you would like to write?
Well, they have nothing to do with social work, so I think we'll skip that one.
But I think maybe the message is that you are vital, you are alive, you are alert, you're interested in many things, that as you're aging, it does not mean that I'm out of touch with the world.
No. Not only am I not out of touch with the world, but you know, I'm still very aware of what's going on in the Middle East. This much I will tell you. I am working on campuses to develop writers. Right now, there is a program that I have funded and have encouraged students to get involved in, particularly the people in journalism and literature and any of the media fields. And I want them to be aware that we have to develop critical thinking so that we can understand the complex issues in the Middle East. They are not easy to solve. We have to be sensitive to other cultures. At the same time, we don't want to lose our own. And I want to develop a group of writers on campuses all over where there would be a Muslim student, a Jewish student, various Christian faith students, sitting together in a small group to write about and talk about how we can keep the poison from the Middle East from invading our campuses. We, at least, can have a civil dialogue. We, at least, have a framework where people are educated to be critical thinkers. And our hope lies with the young people who are developing, and they have to be exposed to the writers, to other thinkers in that field. And you are right, I am very much in touch with the world. But they come to me now, I don't go to them. I can't walk around a campus without help, as you found out. When you are blind and when you are hardly able to walk, you do need help. But that doesn't mean you stop thinking and stop creating, as a matter of fact.
And stop contributing.
Well, I guess so. You might say that's important too. Yes, you have to contribute, not only money. The only people that are honored around in a CCRC are the people who give money. But once they have given that money, that is the end of their usefulness, unfortunately. And these are the people that appear in the publications that go out to the general public. This person gave this much of a legacy and this much of, or bought this gift annuity, and we are constantly being bombarded for money. And my contribution is not considered a very useful contribution by administration, I'm sorry to say. The residents do feel slightly differently. And I think they usually don't contact me because of the fact that I was marginalized. The residents were made to feel if they associated with me, they would not be in favor with the administration. I was really isolated for a very long time. When I started the California Advocate of the California Residents Association, Continuing Care Residents Association here, I had a meeting with two of the top officers who happened to be a resident in another CCRC down the way, and who came here to talk to a few of the people here, and they had to sneak into my apartment. That was before SB 244 was passed, and there was a clause there that said we can form independent residents associations. They don't duplicate the work of the councils, which are basically involved with in-house activities that need attention. But they do focus on larger issues like residents' rights, residents' health and welfare. I mean, speaking generally, there are 20,000 of us, and there are going to be more. So this is very important that both organizations, both the council and the Independent Residents Association. For example, I will tell you, there are things reported, for example, in the publication of the minutes of the Independent Residents Association, which never see the light of day in the minutes of our council meetings. They are carefully controlled. At one point, residents couldn't speak at all at council meetings, and then they had to submit questions in advance, which were going to be screened and decided upon whether they're going to be even allowed on the floor. And then they had 3 minutes to present complex issues. I have never availed myself of that particular lovely extension of my rights because I cannot articulate the complex issues that are involved in this kind of an organization or institution in 3 minutes. I just can't do it. And also, when you do get up at a council meeting and you try to do that, everyone says, sit down, that's not important. They usually are speaking out of ignorance. And I don't get upset about that, but neither do I expose myself to it.
But now you have, over time, used your past expertise and your skill in the field of writing. And most recently, you have become a regular feature article writer for the California NASW California News. Would you care to comment on that?
That also happened by accident. It started with the California Advocates for Nursing Home Reform. I went to see Pat McGinnis, who founded that organization. That is an advocacy organization for elders, and they were only interested in nursing homes for the really vulnerable, very ill people. And I came to them and said, there's a whole area you're not even looking at, and that is the continuing care residential communities. These are able people who come in healthy and who plan to get care for the rest of their lives. And I told Pat McGinnis my story, and Pat came here to see me. And I said, I want to have a regular column where I discuss these issues, and it is called the CCRC Corner. I did that for about a year, and one day I said, you know, this is silly. Why am I not writing for the California News? Why am I not writing for my own profession? They're the only ones that can help. So what I did was I wrote a piece. It was an op-ed piece. And what the op-ed piece said, CCRCs, where social workers ought to be. That was my first piece in September of 2004. This is now 2007. Yes, it's nearly 3 years ago. And I sent it to the then editor, who passed away, and Jan Lee referred to this, the chapter executive director, had to get that issue out, and that's how we met. And I absolutely, when it comes to computers, I can use them for word processing, period. So all of my copy is done on an old Apple that deserves retirement from 1995, and I send hard copy in. Everybody else is doing it by email, and I was fearful also of going on the internet because I was being monitored carefully, and I felt what I wanted to write had to go to the editor and into publication before it was excised. Actually, the CEO here went to Sacramento and spoke to legislators about me and gave them to understand that nothing I said could be believed. And I think she went even further than that. I got letters from those legislators. They were boiling mad because unfortunately or fortunately they knew me. And they knew I can only do one thing. I can only speak the truth. And you know what they did to the old Hebrew prophets. They were not exactly the most popular guys in town. The truth, the person who speaks truth to power takes enormous risks. And I figured I was fully amortized and I'm entitled to take any risk I please now. So I did. But everything goes hard copy. And you won't believe it, but I'm on deadline for the Canner Advocate. And that's how Jan Lee and I met. And Hank Lawson, who is my present editor at the California News, inherited me. And his first thing he said was, "You mean you're not sending it to me on the internet?" I said, "No, I don't know how." And every so often I say, "How are you doing?" He said, "You're the only one who does it that way, but I manage it." And he and I never met until last night. But I feel, you see that bunch of flowers on your left? That came from the young people at Canner, who is part of my extended family. And Maisha Jackson, who was my first editor at Canner, actually works for Darrell Steinberg, who is running the bill that I am now lobbying for and writing about, 489, which pertains to the closures of these places. If you can believe this, there are 10 pages of legislation on how to open these places and not one line on what happens to residents when they close. We are completely on our own. Marguerite Terrace closed last year. Everybody was scattered to the four winds. They were given an option of moving out to a place in Los Angeles from San Jose, that you leave your family, your friends, your doctors, your dentists, everybody behind for the convenience of the administration. They are then able to take a $5 million property or more and sell it, and they come out smelling like a rose. And they transferred 16 people from the health center, so-called skilled nursing. 4 of them died. And I wrote a column on that, and of course I lobby for that bill. I'm working on that now, and I don't even leave the apartment. When I call people and say that I work for AARP, the California News run by the NASW, and I work for Canner, Canner, of course, sued the Department of Health Services for not doing proper inspections. The inspections can't be done properly, and the oversight can't be done properly because the oversight groups do not have enough money. And what's interesting is the contracts branch, which is supposed to oversee the money for here. Can you oversee 78 or 79 CCRCs with 5.5 people all over the state? And if you don't get a penny of tax money and you get the residents' money through the providers, because that is the way our contracts branch of the Department of Social Services is run. So you have nobody to turn to except the media, and that is why I write the columns. I've written the book, and I will continue to speak at any forum given to me. Social workers, you have to retread, retrain, and come to these places, and they must give you a job. They say it's a frill. They say it costs too much, but they're going to build a bistro here to attract the next generation of baby boomers, and they can't afford a social worker, which is less than you pay for a middle management administrator, maybe $80,000 a year with a whole package. Every social worker that does come has to be an advocate. Even though their salary is paid, it's paid with our money. There is no source of revenue but our money. So they are really working, or should be working, only for residents. If they go into a care plan to move somebody out of their apartment, they are sitting there as the advocate for the resident, not for the administration. The deal now is you have a part-time social worker who comes in, who doesn't know the resident, who's done a quick study of the business, gets all her information or his information secondhand from the administration, and the person who's sitting there is not represented at all. And so what I'm saying is that this system, it's a good system, but the implementation, it's the same thing. Like any good idea, I heard that last night over and over from the older social workers who know their business. You can't have anything done properly unless it's implemented properly. Okay? Including the war in Iraq. I believe I've run out of time.
Professor Hyatt, I want to thank you very much, and again congratulate you on your induction into the Hall of Distinction, the ceremony of which took place last night.
I felt very humble there, dear. I am a Johnny-come-lately. Those people are real veterans. I'm still learning my craft.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.